Spring, 1886, Atlanta, Georgia. In a small laboratory behind a house on Marietta Street, a druggist stands over a brass kettle and stirs a dark syrup by hand. He is boiling sugar, water, and 2 plant extracts into a liquid he believes will cure a headache. His name is John Pemberton. He is 55 years old, and he is in pain while he works. The pain is the part the label never mentioned. 20 years earlier, in the last spring of the Civil War, Pemberton had ridden with a Confederate cavalry unit in Georgia. In a clash near Columbus, a saber opened a wound across his chest. Like thousands of wounded men in that war, he was treated with morphine, and like many of them, he did not stop. By the time he was stirring syrup in Atlanta, he had lived with a morphine dependence for 2 decades. He was a trained pharmacist. He knew exactly what the drug was doing to him. He spent years mixing tonics and cures, in part because he was looking for something that would let him stop needing the needle. The most famous drink in the world began, in a real sense, as one sick man trying to fix himself. That is the first thing to hold on to. The second is what he actually put in the kettle. Pemberton was not inventing a treat. He was working in a business that barely exists anymore, the patent medicine trade, and it ran on a simple and mostly dishonest promise. A maker would blend some plants, some alcohol, sometimes a narcotic, and sell the mixture in a bottle with a long list of things it claimed to cure: nerves, headaches, exhaustion, low spirits. There was almost no law telling him what he could put in the bottle or what he could say it did. Atlanta in the 1880s was full of these tonics, and Pemberton had already sold several of his own. One of them was a wine mixed with an extract of the coca leaf, a popular product of the era, copied from a French drink that men across Europe and America were drinking by the glass. The coca leaf is where cocaine comes from. In the 1880s, that was not a scandal. It was a selling point. Doctors prescribed cocaine. Chemists sold it over the counter. It was in tooth drops for children and in remedies for hay fever, and a tonic that carried a trace of it advertised the fact proudly, as proof that the bottle contained something real. Pemberton was doing what the whole trade did. He was reaching for the most fashionable stimulant of his day and folding it into a mixture with a promise on the label. The wine version had done well for him. It was called Pemberton's French wine Coca, and it borrowed openly from a drink out of France that had made its maker rich by selling coca-laced wine to writers, singers, and even popes. Pemberton copied the idea and sold it in Atlanta as a nerve tonic and a builder of strength. For a while, it was one of his better products. He had reason to think the coca leaf was the ingredient that mattered. Then Atlanta took the wine away from him, and to understand why, you have to understand the mood of the country in those years. A movement had been building for decades, and it was gathering force. The temperance movement, it was called, and it held that alcohol was the root of the age's misery. Ruined homes, beaten wives, wages drunk away on a Friday night before they ever reached the family. Church congregations, women's leagues, and reform societies had been preaching against liquor for a generation, and by the 1880s, they were winning votes. County by county, town by town, they were pushing through local bans, drying out one place at a time, and building toward the great national ban that would come 3 decades later and be written into the Constitution itself as Prohibition. The country was slowly, unevenly, deciding to put down the bottle. Late in 1885, that movement reached Pemberton's own county. Atlanta voted itself dry, banning the sale of alcohol. Pemberton's best product was a medicinal wine, and now he could not legally sell it. Sit with the shape of that for a moment, because it is one of the hinges the whole story turns on. If the vote had gone the other way, there is no reason to build a version without alcohol. The French wine Coca would have stayed on the shelf, and the kettle behind the house on Marietta Street might never have boiled. It was the ban that forced the invention. The most successful drink ever made exists, in part, because a wave of reformers took the liquor out of Pemberton's hands and left him needing something new to sell. So he went back to the kettle to build a version with no alcohol in it. He kept the coca. He added an extract of the kola nut, an African seed heavy with caffeine, and he leaned hard on sugar syrup to bury the bitter taste of both. He boiled it, cooled it, and had a thick brown syrup that he believed would ease a headache and steady the nerves. He needed a drink that could survive a town with no liquor. He built one. He had no idea he had built anything else. Now the syrup needed a name, and the name did not come from Pemberton. It came from the man who kept his books. Frank Robinson was Pemberton's bookkeeper and partner, a northerner who had come south after the war and gone into business with the very kind of man he had recently been fighting. Robinson looked at the two main ingredients, the coca leaf and the kola nut, and heard something in them. He suggested the two words be paired, and that the C in kola be changed to a matching C so the whole thing would read cleanly, Coca-Cola. Then he did one more thing that mattered more than anyone in the room could have known. He wrote the name out in a flowing script, in his own hand, and that handwriting became the logo. The looping letters on a can of Coca-Cola today are, in their origin, the penmanship of a bookkeeper in 1886. So by the late spring of 1886, there was a name, a logo, and a barrel of dark syrup. There was not yet a drink. To understand how the syrup became the drink, you have to leave the laboratory and walk a few blocks to a pharmacy. In the 1880s, an American drugstore was not only a place you bought medicine, it was a place you went to sit. The center of it, often, was the soda fountain, a marble counter with taps that served cold carbonated water, flavored with syrups, poured into a glass and handed to you to drink on the spot. And in Atlanta, a dry town, the soda fountain had a second life that the temperance movement had handed it. With the saloons closed, the fountain became the place a respectable person went to gather. It was the meeting spot that was not a bar, the counter where you could stand with a cold glass and talk and not be drinking. Carbonated water itself was sold as a health product, something thought to settle the stomach and cool the blood. The soda jerk behind the tap became a figure in the town. People came to the fountain the way they later came to a coffee shop, and in a place that had just banned liquor, they came in numbers. Pemberton's syrup was made to be a medicine you took by the spoonful, mixed with plain water. What happened next was, by every account, an accident of the counter. At a fountain in Atlanta, most tellings place it at Jacob's Pharmacy. Someone mixed the syrup not with plain water, but with carbonated water from the fountain tap. The fizzing version tasted better than the flat medicine. It tasted, in fact, like something you might drink because you wanted to, not because you were sick. And so the product quietly changed its nature at the moment of sale. It was poured into a glass and sold for 5 cents. 5 cents a glass, at the fountain, from the very first summer. Read the early advertising, and you can watch a company that does not yet understand what it is holding. Pemberton and Robinson placed a notice in an Atlanta newspaper in the summer of 1886. They called Coca-Cola a brain tonic. They said it relieved exhaustion. They aimed it at headaches and tired nerves, at people worn down by their work. They sold it as a cure first and a refreshment second. The most successful soft drink ever made spent its first year being advertised as medicine, because the men selling it believed that was what it was. That first year, the numbers were small. In a full year of selling, the operation moved only a few gallons of syrup a day at best, and took in a few $100s against more than that spent on advertising. Do the arithmetic the way Pemberton would have. He was losing money. The drink that would one day be poured billions of times a year was, in its first summer, a product that cost more to sell than it earned. It was one minor item among many in a crowded Atlanta market, sitting on the same shelves as a dozen rival tonics that have since vanished without a trace. Nothing about the ledger said it would outlive the men who made it. There is a detail here worth sitting with. The people drinking those first glasses at the fountain were not thinking about the future either. They walked into a drugstore on a hot afternoon, put down a nickel, and drank a cold, sweet, faintly bitter thing that woke them up a little. Then they went back to their lives. No one at the counter knew they were present at the start of anything. The start of things almost never looks like a start. It looks like an ordinary Tuesday at a marble counter, and a man behind it wiping down a glass. And John Pemberton was running out of time. He was still sick. The morphine dependence had not lifted, and by most accounts his health was failing through 1887. He was also, plainly, out of money. Making and advertising the syrup cost more than the syrup was bringing in, and Pemberton had other products and other debts pulling at him. He was not a well man building an empire. He was a sick man trying to raise cash. And so he began to do the thing that would define the whole strange shape of this story. He started selling off pieces of Coca-Cola. This is the third thing to hold on to, and it is the one that hurts. He did not sell the whole thing once, cleanly, to one buyer. Beginning in 1887, he sold portions of the rights to different men around Atlanta, at different times, for different sums. A share here, a share there, some of it to settle what he owed. The ownership of Coca-Cola splintered into pieces held by several people, none of whom had the full picture, all of whom had bought into a small local syrup that might or might not amount to anything. Pemberton at one point kept a portion for his son. He signed away most of the rest for the kind of money a man takes when he needs money now. He was not selling the future. As far as he could see, there was no future to sell. There was a modest syrup, a mountain of debt, and a body that was giving out. In August of 1888, John Pemberton died in Atlanta. He was 57. He was, at the end, poor. The drink he had mixed in the kettle carried his invention and his partner's handwriting out into the world, and he did not live to see it become anything at all. The story that he was on his deathbed while other men were already buying up his creation is close to the truth. He never saw what it turned into. He could not have imagined the size of it. Now the story hands off to a different kind of man, and the difference is the whole point. His name was Asa Candler. He was another Atlanta druggist, and he was everything Pemberton was not as a businessman. Candler was careful, patient, and relentless about money and control. He had used Coca-Cola himself for headaches, and he had come to believe the syrup had something the other tonics did not. But where Pemberton saw a medicine, Candler was beginning to see a product that people would buy again and again simply because they liked it. And he understood the flaw in how Pemberton had left things. The ownership was scattered. No single person controlled Coca-Cola, so Candler set out, quietly, to fix that. Through the late 1880s and into 1891, he bought the scattered pieces. He went to the men who held shares from Pemberton's frantic sell-off, and he bought them out, one at a time, gathering the fragments back into a single pair of hands. He bought the rights from the estate. He bought them from partners. By the time he was finished, he had spent a total sum that, measured against everything that followed, is almost impossible to believe. The most reliable accounts put Candler's full cost to gain complete control of Coca-Cola at around $2,000. He assembled, for the price of a modest house, the whole of a company that did not yet know what it was. Then he built it into something no patent medicine had ever been. Candler's genius was not the recipe. The recipe was Pemberton's. Candler's genius was distribution and repetition. He incorporated the Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta in 1892. He poured money into advertising on a scale the tonic makers had never dared, putting the name on trays, on clocks, on calendars, on the walls of drugstores, on fans and matchbooks, and the sides of buildings, on anything that would carry it. He shipped the syrup out in barrels to soda fountains across the South and then across the country so that the same 5-cent glass could be poured in 1,000 towns. He was not selling a cure for tired nerves. He was selling a habit, and he was selling it everywhere at once. But the single sharpest thing Candler did was give the drink away. And it is worth stopping on, because it was close to a new idea in the world. Candler had thousands of tickets printed, each one good for a single free glass of Coca-Cola at a fountain. He mailed them out to lists of names and handed them across counters, and the druggist who served the free glass was paid back by the company for the syrup. These were among the first coupons in the history of American business. No one had really done this before, this deliberate, systematic giving away of a product to a stranger who had never asked for it. And it cost Candler money on every single ticket. That was the point. He was paying, out of his own pocket, to put the first glass into the hands of people who had never tried it, on the bet that enough of them would come back and buy the second one, and the third. For years, Pemberton had tried to convince people they were sick and needed a cure. Candler simply gave the drink away until they wanted it on their own. One approach ends when the customer feels better. The other approach never ends. Historians who study how brands are built come back to those little tickets again and again, because in them you can see the modern age of marketing being born, one free nickel glass at a time. And slowly, the medicine claims fell away. As the drink spread, it stopped being sold as a treatment and started being sold as what it actually was, a cold thing you drank because it tasted good and made you feel briefly better. The kettle in the laboratory had produced a headache tonic. The company Candler built was selling refreshment. Somewhere in that shift, Coca-Cola stopped being medicine and became the thing we would recognize now. But there was still one thing Candler had not done, and it turned out to be the thing that carried Coca-Cola out of the South and into the whole country. He had built the fountain business. He had not yet let anyone put the drink in a bottle. That leap was not really his idea, and he very nearly missed it. In 1899, 2 lawyers from Chattanooga, Tennessee, came to Candler with a proposal. "Let us bottle it," they said. "Let us take your syrup, mix it with carbonated water, seal it in glass, and sell it in places a soda fountain can never reach." A man in a field, a worker on a train, a store with no marble counter and no taps. Candler did not believe in it. He thought the future was the fountain, and he thought bottling was a nuisance that could only put a lesser version of his drink into the world under his good name. So he signed away the bottling rights for almost the whole country, and the price he charged for those rights was $1. $1. He is said to have never even bothered to collect it. Read that again, because it stands beside the $2,000 purchase as one of the 2 great money mistakes hiding at the center of this story. Candler, the careful man, the man who gathered up every scattered share so no one else could hold a piece, handed away the right to bottle Coca-Cola across the United States for a single dollar, because he could not see what it was worth. And it was worth everything. Bottling, not the company, is what actually spread Coca-Cola across America. The two Chattanooga men and the partners they brought in built a system of local bottling plants, each one licensed to buy the syrup and put the finished drink in glass for its own region. Within a couple of decades, there were hundreds of these plants dotted across the country. A bottle could go where a fountain could not. It could ride in a wagon, sit in an icebox in a general store 100 miles from any city, travel to a farm, cross a border. The reason a person in a small town far from Atlanta could hold a cold Coca-Cola in his hand was the bottle, and the bottle was the thing Candler had thrown away for $1. While the drink was spreading in glass, the thing inside it was quietly changing, because the country's mood was turning against one of its ingredients. In the drink's first years, no one blinked at the trace of cocaine that came from the coca extract. By the turn of the century, the country was changing its mind. Cocaine was moving from a wonder ingredient to a public alarm, and a drink sold to families and children could not carry that shadow. The company had already been reducing the active content for years, cutting it down and down. Around 1903, the process was completed, and the cocaine was taken out for good. The coca leaf stayed, as a flavor, but it was now treated to strip the drug out of it before it ever reached the syrup. Coca-Cola kept the first half of its name and quietly removed the thing the name had once literally meant. The trace never fully left the drink's reputation, though, and you can hear it in an old nickname. For years, people called a Coca-Cola a dope. "Give me a dope," a customer would say at the counter, and everyone understood he meant a Coke. The name was a wink at what the drink had once carried, and it hung around in parts of the South for decades after the cocaine itself was gone, a ghost of the coca leaf living on in slang long after it had been boiled out of the syrup. What replaced the secret ingredient was the idea of a secret. As the drink grew, the company began to guard its formula as something almost sacred. The full recipe, the exact blend of oils and flavors that Robinson and Pemberton had first written down, was kept hidden, known to only a few people at any one time. The company told the world that so few people knew the complete formula that they were forbidden to travel together, lest the secret die in a single accident. The written recipe, the story went, was locked away in a bank vault and later moved to a purpose-built vault of its own in Atlanta, put on display behind steel as an object to be revered, a thing you could stand near but never read. Whether every detail of that legend is literally true almost does not matter, because the legend was the product now. The mystery became part of what you were buying. A customer could not know what was in the glass, and that was sold as a feature, not a flaw. The most public drink on earth was built around a recipe almost no one was allowed to see. Now stand the two men side by side, because this is the shape of the whole story. John Pemberton invented Coca-Cola, named it with his bookkeeper, wrote the logo that still runs across the cans, and died broke within 2 years, having sold the thing off in pieces for the money he needed to survive. Asa Candler invented nothing, arrived after the hard chemistry was done, spent about $2,000 gathering up the scraps, and turned those scraps into one of the largest companies in the history of the world. The man who made it got nothing. The man who bought it got everything. And the line between them is not talent or vision in the ordinary sense. It is that one man was dying and needed cash, and the other man was healthy and could wait. Candler ran the company for years, and then, in 1919, sold it to a group of investors for $25 million. From a $2,000 purchase to a $25 million sale in one lifetime, and even that number is nothing next to what came after. Not long after Candler sold out, the country did the thing the temperance movement had spent a century fighting for. In 1920, national prohibition took hold, and the sale of alcohol became illegal across the whole United States. The saloons closed everywhere now, not just in Atlanta, and a cold, sweet, non-alcoholic drink that a person could order in any public place, in any company, without shame, was standing ready to fill the space the liquor left behind. The very band that had once taken the wine out of Pemberton's hands had grown into a national law, and the drink he built for a dry town was perfectly shaped for a dry country. Through the 20th century, the drink went national, then global. It was carried to American soldiers overseas in 2 world wars. The company promising to put a bottle in the hand of every serviceman for a nickel wherever he was, and building bottling plants abroad to do it, so that the drink followed the army around the planet and stayed there after the war was over. It was printed on signs in languages Pemberton never heard. The bookkeeper's looping handwriting became one of the most recognized marks on the face of the earth, known in places that had never heard the name of the man who wrote it. The company that started as a barrel of headache syrup grew into a business worth, at points, hundreds of billions of dollars, one of a small handful of names recognized in nearly every country on the planet. And then, at the height of all that, the company nearly ruined it in a single stroke. By the middle of the 1980s, Coca-Cola was losing ground to its great rival, and the rival's sweeter taste was winning blind taste tests. So in 1985, the company did something almost unthinkable. It changed the formula. It took the guarded, near-sacred recipe, the one locked in the vault, the one the whole mystery had been built around, and it replaced it with a new, sweeter version. New Coke, the public called it. The company was proud of it. They had tested it on thousands of people, and the numbers looked good. The country revolted. People were furious in a way the company had never seen. They hoarded the old version off the shelves. They formed protest groups. They flooded the company with hundreds of thousands of angry calls and letters, grieving a soft drink as though a piece of their own childhood had been taken from them. It turned out that the thing people loved was not only the taste. It was the idea that this one thing would never change. The constant on the shelf, the drink their grandparents had ordered by the same name. In under 3 months, the company surrendered. It brought back the original recipe, called it Coca-Cola Classic, and let the new version quietly die. The most valuable brand on earth had reached into its own vault, touched the secret, and been slapped back by its own customers. Pemberton's 100-year-old syrup, it turned out, was not the company's to change. Frank Robinson, the bookkeeper who named it and drew the logo, stayed with the company for years under Candler and helped build the advertising that carried it. His penmanship outlived him by more than a century. His name is far less known than the 2 words he arranged. And the family of the man who invented it did not share in any of that. Pemberton's son held the portion his father left him and did not turn it into wealth. The Pemberton name, the name of the man who stood over the kettle, appears almost nowhere on the product he created. There are histories that record him. There is a marker in Atlanta, but no one drinking a Coca-Cola thinks of a wounded veteran with a morphine dependence, mixing a cure for his own headaches in a laboratory behind a house. 5 cents a glass, dead and poor before the world ever tasted what he made. Here is the number that ends it, and you can hold both halves of it in one hand. The rights to Coca-Cola were gathered up, in full, for about $2,000, and the right to bottle it across a nation was signed away for a single dollar that was never collected. The company those rights became has been valued, in the years since, in the hundreds of billions. John Pemberton sold it for scraps. He never lived to see the price.